right. We are getting ready to start our last and final session. It is going to be a fireside chat titled Leading Cybersecurity, Risks, Relationships, and Resilience. So you guys may not know this, but we put out a call for papers and we get a ton of responses. And then sometimes we can't figure out how to get two people we want on with the time frame that we have. And then we have panels like this. Akash and Ahmed both had very compelling papers along some of the same similar tracks, and we decided to make it into a fireside chat. And then you can't have a fireside chat without the great Frank Kim, and I have the honor of hosting. I'm gonna let both of them introduce themselves. Akash, Ahmed, we'll start with you, Ahmed, and then Akash, please feel free to go next.
Yeah, thanks, Jerich and Sands for the opportunity to have this great discussion. I'm Northern Virginia local, grew up here in consulting and risk management, transitioned to cybersecurity while at Fannie Mae, and then spent time at Morgan Stanley, and then currently now the divisional CISO for commercial and small business banking. Got the job from the esteemed Jerich himself. So yep, it's been good. And I'm always really, pleased to be able to hop on some of these kind of calls. I learn a lot. I caught the last bit of Digi's presentation, but trust is a big theme that I think is going to be weaved in across this conversation too. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Ahmed. Akash.
Same as Ahmed, Jerich, and Frank. Thank you for providing this wonderful opportunity. So, hello everyone. I'm Akash Verma. I'm a technical program manager for continuous assurance engineering at Google. And what that basically means is me and my team are responsible for making sure that all the risk and controls we can identify them and we can continuously monitor them. So that's the 100% of the work that I do at Google. But before Google, I have been part of LinkedIn as well as Discover Financial Services, where I kind of have worked in all three lines of defenses. So I have been an IT auditor, I have been in the governance side of the house, I have been in the SecOps. So kind of have my foot into the door into all three lines of defenses. So that has been my background, and I'm really looking forward to discussing more about the non-traditional way of working into the cybersecurity. How can we utilize some of the Six Sigma methodologies and then the other areas to kind of improve the way the programs are being run at the global scale?
Thank you, Akash. I'm going to skip myself and Frank because I think you guys may know us by now, and we have a lot of content, so we'll just hop right in. So first one, I'm going to ask you, Ahmed, but everybody's feel free to answer. What strategies have you identified as more effective when bridging the gap between cybersecurity and business objectives? This is a hot topic. We've talked about it all day. I'd love your take on it.
Yep. No, it's a good question. I think obviously partnership, trust, and risk trade-off, those are things that come to mind right away. One thing that I like to do is just immediately understand who my business is, what they do, how they make money, and the risks that are relevant to each one of the lines of businesses. I mean, there may be teams that are more focused on reputational risk. It may be cyber-enabled fraud. It may be compliance. But really, you have to understand kind of where they are, what their concerns are, before we start layering on, all of our monolithic cyber controls. I think they need to know that we're a partner. We're empathetic to what they need. We work with them. I've gotten pretty close to multiple product teams across different companies. I work very closely with even compliance and legal and sales teams because everyone's got a different angle that they're coming at from the risk and kind of what they need from the cybersecurity team. So the business acumen, I'm sure has been mentioned all day long. That's got to be, of course, number one. But I think it's also trust. And by understanding what they do, how they're making money and the risk they're worried about, I think that's how you can foster that trust between them. I've had some of the best moments actually in cyber are when business leaders and compliance leaders and legal leaders reach out proactively to say, what should we do about this, right? I think, in times past, cyber was always seen and, somebody leave at the door and we have to jump through gates and get approvals. But I think once they see that you are on the same side, and definitely I'm happy to talk more about it later on, that's where I think you really see a true partnership.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes, historically we had to kind of push our way into the table, and now there's a seat just waiting for us as long as we can approach that table appropriately. Anybody else have any thoughts on that one?
So Jerich, I think I would plus one on what Ahmed said. Kind of a similar methodology and the mental model that I use is basically how do we connect our priorities, our mission and vision to the entire corporate objectives, right? So I think about it more from a waterfall model, like just as an example, right? Like, hey, the corporate objectives. Let's say if we take a demo of a financial service sector company, their corporate objectives might be we want to increase the financial revenues and we want to increase the customer satisfaction. How do we connect those how do we kind of map those corporate objectives to the internal business processes that we have? An example of the internal business process can be we want to make sure that we have good IT service continuity management. That might be within an IT department. And then how do we map those internal business processes into the actual projects and portfolio of the work that the cybersecurity team is doing, which can be something around, let's say, okay, making sure that we have 99% of availability and we have a good resiliency program. So having that top down water flow model and also the bottom up water flow model to show that how the corporate objectives are tying to the actual portfolio of the work that we are doing is something that I feel like is a very good way of bringing in the synergies between the business side of the house and the cybersecurity.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Before I go on, please, anybody that has any questions, we have some planned questions, but the best ones are the ones that come from you guys. So please submit your questions and we will pivot and try to incorporate your questions into this as well. So the next question that I have, I think is directly for you, Akash. Um, what are some of the challenges in ensuring that every employee understands their role in cybersecurity? How do you address that?
Sure thing. So I think it ties back to the previous question we had, right? One of the biggest challenges that I have seen and have experienced throughout my career is cyber, including the IT department, is being seen as a value protector and not a value creator. So that's a mental model that we need to make sure that there is a change, that hey, cybersecurity can also be a value creator. If we synthesize all the board discussion that happens at the C level and at the board of directors levels, most of the conversation are driven by, hey, what are the new value streams that we can create, and how can we protect the value streams that we have already created and are making revenue for us. And influencing the psychology of the employees, I would say, is a very key aspect to overcome this challenge. If I put it in a simple way, the way it can be done is what Ahmed said before, right? We need to build the trust. And how do we build the trust? We build the trust by making sure that all our plans and strategies are transparent. The way I feel like the way we can do this is basically dividing all the scope of work that the cybersecurity team has into three buckets. The first portfolio of the work is, hey, what are the areas where we can create the values? Second bucket is, hey, what are the buckets where we can protect the value? And then the third bucket is, what are the places where we are not adding the value? And as you said, Jerich, is like people looking at us as a blocker. So I think dividing those into three buckets and then putting out a strategy and making it as public as possible within the company, so that not only your cybersecurity teams but the business lines can also understand what work you are doing on an annual, biannual, 5-year basis, so that they understand, okay, this is how these strategies are connecting, and this is how all the employees can work in a kind of a collaborative fashion to ensure that we make a one common goal towards not only the security but also on the business side of the house.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if I can just add quickly to Akash made a good point. I think maybe it's worth emphasizing is how do we remove the barriers and controls? It's almost impossible to put a cyber controls in place and then somehow it gets removed, right? And I think that's where again, building that trust is like, all right, we're not going to always come with a stick, and based on the risk profile that this team has, we no longer need this control in place. That's causing friction for the business. So I think that's a good one to emphasize.
No, it's definitely a little bit of a balancing act. I was doing a consulting engagement once with this one company, and they were still a relatively young company, startup. But they'd done well. They'd achieved $1 billion plus valuation, and they had hired their first CISO about a year before. Excuse me, that I had gotten connected with them. And at that time, I got connected with the CEO, And I was talking to her and she said, hey, we hired this CISO about a year ago. And I kind of feel like when he joined, shortly after he joined, he kind of flipped the script on us. And when he joined, he said, hey, all of a sudden, now we've got to spend a lot of money. We've got to spend 350 grand on an expensive EDR tool. We've got to spend another 200 grand on, deploying these capabilities. We need to hire a director of the SOC and make sure that we've got a 24/7 SOC and so on. And, he was basically on his way out, his short story, which is when I got involved. And I asked them, I said, well, hey, how many incidents have you had? And they're like, well, I don't know, none that we know about. How many, people are at your company? I forgot the exact number, but, they said something like 200. I said, well, you're all in the cloud. How many cloud VMs? How much infrastructure do you have in the cloud? And they told me some modestly sized number by enterprise standards. So the problem was, and it's exactly what Ahmed and Akash, you guys are saying, is that the CISO was putting together a plan that was not stage appropriate for the business, didn't understand the motivations of the business, where the organization was, and he didn't realize that, hey, he couldn't take his traditional enterprise playbook that perhaps he had used in a prior life and apply it to the company at this stage. And even though the company had gotten a lot of funding, a $1 billion valuation, hey, they can't afford to spend 350 grand on an EDR solution. There's other things, other controls, other ways to add security value. And he didn't realize that perhaps at that stage, probably, to be honest, 80% of his job was going to be sales enablement. Now, of course, hey, you've got to implement some controls to show that you're doing the right thing. But, he didn't really understand and build trust with that CEO, with that leadership team, because, well, he didn't know what was most important to them at the time. And if they continued to grow as rapidly, it might be in a year or two, they could start to adopt some of those more enterprise elements of the playbook, but they just weren't there yet.
Yeah, that's a great point, Frank. So there's so many ways I could take everything that I just heard, but so there are different CISO archetypes, right? Some CISOs are more compliance driven. Some CISOs are going to get you to an IPO. Some CISOs you bring in after breach because they just have the bravado necessary to instill confidence. Some CISOs are just steady state. They're going to continue to keep things going. They're not going to do too much to hurt you or too much to improve you. Every kind of like there's different CISOs that are out there. But what I also heard you say is there's different CISOs at different times that you may need depending on your organization. And sometimes it'll get you here, it won't get you there. But one point that I think I heard from all of you is the power of why, right? It's one thing for him to say, we need 350 for this and we need 200 for this. If the why was compelling enough, it would be a much different conversation versus just the what. And sometimes I think leaders they forget that they know all of the reasons why, but there are so many others that don't. And understanding the business, like Ahmed and Akash have alluded to, will help you articulate that why in a way that's going to be compelling. So Frank, since you just last spoke up, I got a question for you. What technologies do you think are really transforming the field of cybersecurity, and how are they impacting your strategic approach when you're talking to customers?
And I think this is a leading question because we had so many sessions and discussions about Gen AI today. So yeah, of course, hey, we think we're in the early stages of that being a transformative technology. But I guess broadly speaking, why is it so interesting? It's because, well, we've been struggling with, as an industry, automation for all of this time and finding that proverbial needle in the haystack with the mountain of data, dealing with all of those vulnerabilities in various environments that I've been in where we had millions of vulnerabilities. There was no way that we were going to get that down to some reasonable raw number. And really, it's with automation, with generative AI, with being able to augment the capabilities of our analysts, our security team. Yeah, that's what looks promising. And what's uncertain is we're still in the very early stages of this, of being able to figure it out. It took quite a handful of years for once the iPhone came out for there to be a Airbnb and an Uber and so on to take advantage of those native mobile capabilities. And sure, hey, co-pilots are useful, but kind of that, to be honest, basic augmentation of doing copywriting better, doing editing better, doing document creation better, doing other creation, image generation better, that seems very transformative, but we don't know what's necessarily going to come next, especially for a complex area like security.
Completely agree. Ahmed, Akash, you guys have any thoughts on that before I chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I think Gen AI is the hot topic right now whenever we're talking about technologies. And I think from the security perspective, people are always worried. well, we don't have control of this yet. What about the data? What about third parties? Who's using it? What are they doing with it? But I think the ship has sailed. I mean, it's going to be adopted, right? So I think, one thing that as cyber practitioners we can do is get on the right side of that conversation early and help our teams, use it safely, right? I mean, we've got teams that can save thousands of man hours per year by having, Gen AI sort through documents and, do summaries for them, right? And it's fairly, light touch for something that in some of the large language models, but I think that's what it is, it's a kind of like a scary new frontier, but one that, one that's coming.
Yeah. So there's a quote by Wayne Gretzky. He says he doesn't skate to where the puck is, he skates to where the puck is going. So that's why I kind of hopped on the Gen AI bandwagon a couple of years ago. The next place I think is going that we as security practitioners are going to have to figure out is wearables. More and more hardware is being developed with AI built in. The average security practitioner has no idea how to deal with hardware security. We never really needed to. We kind of just trusted what the computer manufacturer sent us. Soon, people are going to have them on their, on their lapel pin, or they already got the watches and so forth. But I see a world where people are talking into devices and it's translating onto a computer and other things a lot more often. And I think that's going to really change the way we do security. It's going to have to move from software to hardware at a higher clip than it is today. What about you, Akash? Anything else you
Yeah, actually, Jerich, I actually have another example that I feel like is going to be very, very important. Is the user-centered design around cybersecurity. So I've always felt like the user-centered design, or the UX and UI versus the cybersec, these two realms has not crossed a lot of intersection. And the reason I'm kind of moving away from AI is because I'm pretty sure across the summit and across all the other summits that's happening across the world, AI is the key focus right now. Um, but I personally feel like the user-centered design in cybersecurity is gonna have a long, long run. A good example can be, and this is one of the personal example, right? So me and my spouse, we went to one of the hotels. We logged into Netflix, and when we were checking out, we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we log out of Netflix? Jerich, Frank, Ahmed, do you know if you logged into Netflix on a TV, how do you log out?
It took me a long time to figure it out when I had to do it. I had to Google it.
Yep. Somebody has to go to the support menu and then they have to log out. So this is just an example of a balance where it's kind of a usability versus a security. If you are running late to check out from the hotel, and if you forgot to log out the Netflix, somebody can have access to your entire Netflix account. And if somebody does not know how to revoke the access of the already existing devices in your account, that TV is running your Netflix account. So that's what I feel like is a user-centered design with cybersecurity is a place where I feel like can be the next 10 years, where the new products and services are being based not only from a security mindset but also from a usability mindset, and how both of them come together.
Yeah, I think Olivia brought up identity and access management, which is a perfect example. I don't know if there's one security control that is more user facing and that can directly impact the user's experience just as much, if not more, than it can impact security than identity. You do it well, people celebrate you. You do it bad, and you get raked over the coals really quickly. So Ahmed, I have another one for you. What innovative methods have you implemented recently or today that enhance your team's effectiveness in managing cybersecurity? And I'm gonna give you a challenge. I'm not saying Gen AI.
Got it. Challenge accepted. I think one thing is everything we talked about earlier, right? Getting in relationships with the business teams. That way we're plugged into products and service meetings much earlier than historically, was in cyber organizations. That way, before they go too far down the road of selecting a vendor or, writing out the code, that you can put those cybersecurity controls in there. I think some of the normal stuff, plug into the regular cadences with your business, compliance, legal, product teams, risk management teams. Akash mentioned second line risk management team. Make sure you're plugged in with that team as well. And then, of course, all the meet and greets and what have you. But one thing that definitely helps is that our frontline business users, like folks in operations, in the back office, they generally don't get to interact with cybersecurity. So one simple thing that can be done is, reaching out to a spattering of those folks across different lines of business and just asking, what is your pain point? Like, what makes your IT life hard? And it's amazing because some of the stuff you can fix really easily on the tech side. It's a script, it's allowing, a random macro, it's increasing, file size and what they can share. But I don't think they're used to getting asked those questions. So by doing that, you get to find out their pain points, prioritize them, fix the ones that you can. And just by removing that friction, and all of a sudden, their teams are singing your praises, right? Because now you've done something where we didn't think on the tech and cyber side, it was extremely challenging, but it saved them tons of time. So doing that, and then also repeating the steps, right? I mean, risks change, regulatory environments change, new product offerings change. So cyber is not going to be a one-time, okay, let's meet with all these folks. Here's the business, here's the risks, and then we'll manage it from there. It's got to be a repeated process. So being involved early and often.
Yeah. So a couple points. One, I remember I asked you to go sit with certain people for an entire day and just watch them do work. Right. Watch them do work, see what they do. And it's crazy how many things they bring up. One, that you didn't know that they were doing. And you're like, wow, you're doing it that way. And then you also become the IT guy as well. Hey, the printer's not working. This isn't working. Either way, you kind of ingratiate yourself to them. And now you have a relationship that you can lean on and will benefit you. I work for waste management with WM. We pick up trash, right? That's one of the things that we do beyond all the sustainability stuff. I do ride-alongs with the guys in the trucks. The truck smells, but I get to learn a lot about the process and the business. It's extremely beneficial to just be with them throughout the process. What are your thoughts on this one, Frank?
Really understanding what the business values, that's the most important thing. I think it was Ahmed earlier that said, hey, how do they make money? But hey, you might be in an organization that is not a profit-driven organization, that maybe is a mission-driven one or regulatory focused or compliance focused. The way I like to think about it is, hey, let's say when I've showed up at a new organization, I try to get a sense from the security team. Hey, what is one thing that the security team you've done in recent months that somebody loved? Even if it was a relatively small thing. And I guarantee, even if you feel that, hey, security doesn't get enough support in your org, there is something that the security team has done that somebody really appreciated. And then just go pull on that thread a little bit more. And then, keep on asking, well, why they actually like that. Now, in a for-profit organization, it's usually deciphering all of the, weeding out all of the confusing information about, hey, well, what are the most important processes related to, well, making money in that organization, manufacturing, operations, logistics, whatever it might be. But in a nonprofit driven organization, it's, hey, well, what do your stakeholders care the very most about? Teaching a class with SANS, I had a guy, well, let me say it this way. I used to work at an organization where we were reporting to the CISO. And the CISO charged my peer, the guy that was responsible for all of network security, for implementing a new network blocking initiative. And his team, that was great. It was right up their alley. So the team went and for months worked on this. And they rolled out the change on a Friday. Well, alarm bells should be going off. Monday, everybody came into the office, and the help desk, the support desk, different business units, they couldn't access the websites they could access just on Friday. Well, what did he do wrong? He didn't talk to anybody, right? He didn't do the basics of talking to the various stakeholders. And so, well, a different person, right? He came to class and said, wow, that's crazy. The reason I'm in this class is because my boss, I did the exact same thing. And my boss sent me to this class to try to learn what not to do.
It's awesome. So we're going to have our first audible. We have a question that just came in. Has anyone on the panel seen any serious consideration to how quantum computing will affect security? All right, just go ahead and share, Frank.
Yeah, well, hey, if I was pausing for a moment to see if anybody else wanted to jump in, but hey, I think we've all heard the headlines of quantum's going to break security and break cryptography as we know it, and that FUD is kind of true in the sense that, hey, the way that quantum works, when we do have a powerful enough quantum computer, which we don't publicly know of exists yet, it will be able to break or really hinder asymmetric encryption as we know it, so public key cryptography. However, it's not necessarily going to do that for symmetric cryptography, because what we're going to do with symmetric cryptography is we're just going to go ahead and double the key sizes, and it'll mitigate the risk of in that particular area. But because of the risk to asymmetric encryption, yeah, that's a problem. And now the whole industry there are various working groups. NIST has a PQ, post-quantum crypto working group, and so on, working on various new algorithms. In fact, one of the popular new algorithms has been just recently, earlier this year, if I remember correctly, implemented under the hood by Apple in their iMessage protocol. If you are on a certain version of iOS, you now have iMessage doing traditional asymmetric encryption, but also doing post-quantum key exchange and cryptography under the hood to get ready for the fact that, hey, eventually we're going to have publicly available quantum computers that are strong enough. So now that the way they've implemented it is pretty cool, because now the adversary has to crack both the traditional asymmetric encryption and the post-quantum algorithm as well.
First of all, Frank, you have people dusting off their CISSPs trying to figure out what's asymmetrical versus symmetrical, what is RSA, what is AES, trying to figure it out. They don't have that conversation. I'm gonna go to both of you guys because Ahmed and Akash, you guys are both in deeply technical organizations that have deeply sensitive information. I can't imagine the topic hasn't come up. I know it's come up with you, Ahmed. And so I'm going to start with you, Akash, and I want to hear what your thoughts are on this post-quantum cryptography question.
Yeah, definitely, Jerich. And I think everything that Frank said, I'm kind of plus oneing on that. I feel like, as you said, right, like people are still trying to figure out symmetric versus asymmetric, and QKD has a long way to go. A lot of companies, including mine, are still doing a lot of research on not only the software aspects of the quantum computing, but also on the hardware aspects. So I feel like until that technology, both hardware and software, kind of come together, I feel like it's still a long way to go around the QKD and how the quantum key distribution is going to come place. The other thing I would say is a lot of people have fear from a nation state's perspective that, okay, if US is not the first one, some other countries might develop the quantum computing. But again, it goes down to the question of how powerful is your hardware, right? Do you have the necessary components? Are those components have enough maturity to even produce a powerful computer that can break an asymmetric cryptography right now, as Frank said? So those are the only thought. And I feel like US has been a little bit more transparent on how the technology is going to work, more from an hardware and software perspective. um, so I personally feel like the maturity of the hardware is really important over here before we can even think about breaking the asymmetric encryption.
Yep. Thanks, Akash. That's a good angle to the hardware one, which doesn't get enough attention. I think what I can say is, I guess generally the financial services industry is looking at post-quantum certs and rolling that out. I also have acquaintances and friends from my past days that are leading quantum at CISA, which, now that you mention it, Jerich, I probably should reach out to them and get even more information.
Yeah, I'll just end it with, there's a conversation around the data that exists today versus new data. And so we're looking at using quantum resistant technologies for new things that come into play. It's pretty rare that you bring in a new technology and you can't ask that question and have something put into place. Now, for all that old data that's sitting, in those data stores and so forth, different conversation. I don't think many organizations have figured it out, but we're saying let's not dig a deeper hole now that we can create technology that can protect us from this quantum revolution that'll come at some point in time. All right, I think we have one more question. Someone asks about internal audit. That's a riveting subject. So can you guys speak to the importance of involving internal audit on the implementation of new technologies and cyber strategies early in the life cycle? I'll just pause there. Interesting subject.
Yeah.
Akash, go ahead.
Yeah, Jerich, I know this, like one of the things around internal audit is a very sensitive subject, but I feel like everything, whether it's a traditional technology and a new technology, I think the first step of the process is how do you govern them, right? Management is a different piece. but governance comes first. So I think if the company can have a conversation around like, hey, what does the governance pipeline looks like for that particular new technology, things like audit, risk management, legal, privacy review, all kind of falls into an individual buckets, and it's like the pieces of the puzzle that keeps on falling upon each other. So I think the bigger piece before internal audit is, hey, how do we govern, how do we socialize, how do we communicate, and how do we bring all the leaders within the company on the same page before we even start implementing the new technologies.
Yep, completely agree. I think I can look at it from a different angle. I think, across financial services and companies, internal audit, sometimes can be seen as an adversary. When I think I would rather partner with internal audit, make them feel comfortable about our mitigations and remediations and timelines, and be transparent with those risks than have them come in and find some of those. And I think and I've worked with tons of internal audit teams over the last, 15 years. And if you're honest, transparent, like they'll work with you, right? Um, I think they can be a big ally. Um, in fact, there's been, times where, if cyber or tech is falling on deaf ears in terms of risk management, internal audit can escalate that up, and bring light to risks that have been, identified. So I I've been pretty good with internal audit over the years, mainly because I'm transparent and we've built trust so that they don't weaponize information in a way that would be negative, for me and my teams. But it's been a pretty good relationship though.
Thanks, Ahmed. This is the last question I'll ask us for all of you guys. How have you incorporated elements like candor, humor, and empathy into your leadership to improve your team resilience and morale in high pressure situations?
I can
I'll
just give a
start.
simple answer.
Yeah, go ahead,
I
Ahmed.
think people are human and want to be treated as humans, right? I think it's probably mentioned earlier today, but burnout is very real in cyber. So when you can lead with honesty, empathy, I think it creates trust within your team, and ultimately that leads to better outcomes. Um, so I think it's just that's got to be at this point that's got to be in the leadership, and if you don't have it, you're not going to be, you're probably not going to last very long at that place.
Kind of same thing as Ahmed said, Jerich. Like, I think in cyber we need more emotional intelligence, like EQ more than IQ. I would say you need more emotional intelligence. You need to be more empathetic. Active listening, I would say, is a very key component. The way I look into the leadership and I look into how it should be managed is it's not a title, it's not a position, but it's an attitude and it's a kind of a characteristic that an individual has, right? So we always talk about, hey, how you're going to manage up versus how you're going to manage down, but the other prospect or the other dimensions that we need to look into is, hey, how you're going to manage left and right with your peers. And to me personally, including empathy and candor also means how do you build credibility and likability within the organization. So going back to my point, active listening and making sure that you provide the support not only to the top and bottom but also to your left and right peers is something that's very important.
Right
Oh,
on
I
mute.
got accidentally muted. There's a saying that you can get anything you want in life if you help enough other people get what they want. And really, this Divya mentioned this in her session a lot, is understanding the other person's motivations. Olivia mentioned this as well. And what do they want? One of my favorite TV shows, which many of you may have seen, is Game of Thrones. And my favorite character in Game of Thrones is Tyrion Lannister, because he's got various personal challenges that he has to overcome. But how does he get out of all of those personal challenges and those hairy situations and situations where physical harm might even come to him? He immediately, if you go back and watch the show, he immediately asks them, so what do you want? What can I give you? Is it money? Is it fame? Is it power? Is it glory? Is it just you want me to be a friendly sounding board? Right? And so every single day, at home, with your kids, at work, with your colleagues, you've got to find, this is why it's hard, we've got to, as leaders, decipher what the situation requires. And the problem is we've got to continuously decipher what the situation requires. Sometimes we're better than at it than other times, like in the morning versus at night when we're tired. So really it's, yes, understanding how you can help the other person, the other party, from yourself, your team, the individuals, the team overall, to your executives, and by proxy, the enterprise, the business overall, get what they want. That's going to help you, your security team, get farther.
I love all of those answers. My answer is much more simple. I'm a millennial and my meme game is strong. My GIF game is even stronger, right? And we throw in some dad jokes and people just get loose, a little more personality into it, and you're just gonna get better output. Well, we are at our point. Ahmed, Akash, Frank, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you for thinking on your toes with the quantum computing question that you had no idea was coming your way. And of course, to talk on internal audit. Who doesn't want to talk about that? Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Everybody, thank you for your questions. We're getting ready to wrap up here, and see you guys on your way.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Pleasure.
Frank
Thank
and
you.
Jerich. Yep, pleasure.